Why don't we start this way? Ultimately, what I want to do is end up talking about trying to answer the goals of for this specific merger. But before we get there, we're going to just talk generally about these two mergers and get this. I guess I think it's a useful activity because it firstly acquaints you with what actually these proposals look like. They're not complex documents, so it get you more familiar with that. But secondly, you can start to see how other districts try to answer the same questions, which I think in itself is useful. And then the last thing we'll do tonight is talk a bit about the communications plan and talk, to that question Lisa raised earlier, how we might start to share this with Catholic folks. So why don't we start with under the idea of what you found that was interesting or good, useful about these mergers. Rutland South, did you guys find anything of interest or of value in their merger plan?
Oh, that's my notes. Hold on. We're talking about that. The interesting thing we put was that it seemed like the merger for Rutland South, it merged, but it also allowed for compromise and dealt with some unique concerns of things.
Yes.
That's it.
That's it?
That, or?
Yeah, that's just in general. I just
More
wanted,
interesting.
yeah. So you guys know Rutland South, right? You know the organization because you live near here a little bit? Yeah, so you know about Timoth and their story. Okay. So that merger was interesting because of Timoth, right? Who had joined ESU sort of recently and wasn't part of the Mill River Union School District. But one of the commonalities between both these two proposals is that they are both essentially supervisory district merger proposals. So they're getting rid of their supervisory unions. That's not your situation. Right? So when you hear about Rutland South in particular, saving some money by eliminating duplication of effort in terms of payroll office and so forth, they must have had some of those activities happening in the schools. And as part of this merger, they were rolling all that up and eliminating positions, administrative positions, and creating one central office where they might have had some payroll and purchasing offices distributed among their schools. That's not the situation here, okay? So just to point out, you were talking about forming a RED. The RED would still have to exist inside a supervisory unit. You'd still have a central office with payroll office that would be shared among other districts. Right? So it's a little different type of merger. That's why this year, the conversations you're having, the RED conversations, are much more challenging in a lot of ways. I mean, that's listening to both groups and like this is a little harder than doing a SD type merger where it's fairly obvious. We're taking our whole organization, forming one district, and getting rid of anything that's a duplication of effort in terms of administrative services. So it's a little more challenging. But I think Rutland South did work through this in a way that's kind of interesting.
Really like the safety net they put for a town like Timoth.
Yeah.
Where that the unified board couldn't just make a change in that town and say too bad.
Close the school.
Change.
Yeah. So that's a good one to point out.
That there was a real safety.
Yeah, they figured out a way, and there's a law, Act 46 talks about requiring voters or protecting the small school basically for 4 years. So no school can close in that 4-year period without a vote of the voters of the town. But Timoth went a little step further because they got into the composition of the new board and knew they'd be outvoted. So they required a unanimous vote of the union board as a condition to even go before the voters. So they, that's right. And that's allowed under the law. There's nothing in the law that says you can't do that. So they created that way through it. One of the things in there too, did you see the letter from the lawyer, Pietro Lynn, about how they configured their board? That's something we'll get into. We talk about designations being a challenging issue. I said before, the 3 big challenging issues being a merger are going to be choice or designation, your assets and liabilities, and the third one's going to be the size of the board. It's who's on it and what the representation. It's actually, that'll be an easier thing for you because your communities are relatively the same size, but it's always something that's politically really challenging to answer. It's more challenging when you have a big district merging with a small district. And you get that like timid sensation of being outvoted. Do you guys find anything of value in Orange Southwest?
Well, I mean, we found, because there were no savings or anything, because it was already bunch of schools that were already operating under central. Okay, so there was no savings from combining. I think the main advantage for us is the generalities. Curriculum, you can imagine curriculum advantages, whether it's foreign language, art, sports, there's a possibility, and special needs. There's a possibility of that being developed and giving it more flexibility. Other than that, we identified needs because we needed to know about the assets of the three school districts that which we don't know, and tax consequences of possible merger scenarios.
And you found that information in your merger report for the district you looked at? They had the liabilities and assets and
No,
tax rates?
I think it was in the Rutland one, but not in the orange.
Yeah.
It's not too much in the orange.
But the tax rate implications were in the one that we looked at, on page 52.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see usually with the, stylistically, I want to get a sense of the worksheet that goes to the state board. Generally has general statements, these sort of bullets, but the report, and then the report is the thing that your voters are going to really look at. Your voters are going to need a heck of a lot more information than the state board needs. State board's going to assess your proposal relative to the law. So is what you're proposing illegal or not? And if it does comply with the policy environment, and doesn't leave anyone in isolation or not. Those are really the only criteria the state board has that's advantage. But your voters are going to need a heck of a lot more information.
And that's, I think, what we felt
Yep.
we needed.
Yep.
So a nice table like on packet page 52, to have the with and without.
Yep.
We have that with
Yep.
the Hartford towns.
The other aspect of that, sometimes people, when they look at this law, 706, which goes back to the 50s and 60s when people were building schools under this union merger, the data that was necessary to do that was significant. So if you did a merger study report, you had to have projections of enrollments, you had to have square footage of the buildings because the state was going to help support you building this new school. So these reports were large. That's not the situation here under Act 46. These reports are pretty minimal, table of tax rates, liabilities, but they're not huge, chapter documents. They're pretty simple documents.
Except that we have to, three towns are, we have to go to
No,
voters.
I get you.
and tell them what
I'm
they
just
think.
saying they're not, sometimes people think they're 100-page reports. That's not what you're talking about. Anything that was unique in your report, any unique accommodation or aspect of the law that these guys came together on, or was it pretty straightforward from your perspective? You see anything interesting there that was sort of like an accommodation?
No, we actually put on what would be unique things for our merger, rather than what we found in there wasn't really anything super interesting in the Orange Southwest merger.
So as I said to this group, if you guys looked at Orange Southwest, there's an example of a supervisory union that was highly centralized. They had already, I was saying, do budgets. They would meet as a group of boards and do their budgets together. They had really centralized everything. So their merger was very, very simple. And also, you'll see not significant in terms of savings, which I think is the reason I thought it was useful for you is that the merger that's being contemplated here will not yield significant savings. Okay? It's not one of these, there's magic money to be found someplace, okay? Rutland or Orange Southwest, the same idea. There was nothing significant they were contemplating. There was a little few tweaks of $65,000, which is not a lot of money for bringing these districts together. Rutland South had some more money on the table because they had still some operational efficiencies that needed to be sorted out. But Orange Southwest, very simple merger, okay? So let's take a look at the policy objectives of Act 46 and see how these guys addressed it, and let's start to contemplate specifically how this merger would address those policy requirements. So this is, the addition X, the Section 706. Your merger has to answer these questions. And the way that, one thing I point out is, again, this is not an SD merger, so you are not dissolving the supervisory union as part of this. Most likely, you're just going to be putting this district into a supervisory union. That being said, I think the way I start talking with the other group about this is to think about this is, I talk about an ecosystem, so you're talking about this valley, whatever this is, whether it's the Medowee Valley, the river I know runs through here, but think of Rupert, Pollitt, Wells now being governed by a single school board. You're drawing a boundary like that, just around this group. If there was one board in one district in this valley with the two schools, what advantages does that get you educationally or otherwise? Efficiency-wise? Think about it from that perspective, because you're not really, the things like centralizing special ed, curriculum, those things have already been done. Rutland Southwest has done that, VRSU has done that. Actually, what you're contemplating sort of disrupts that because you're forming a new school district, right? So what's the advantage of having one school district serving the kids of this valley? And that's to question number one. How will that, having one district in this valley, provide substantial equity, quality, and variety of educational opportunities? As opposed to having 3 school boards, 4 school boards, now you're going to have one school board overseeing the whole valley. Are there opportunities to provide increased equity in the quality of the educational opportunities for students? That's your question, essentially. You guys come up with anything?
Well, we stole from,
Yeah, what'd you steal?
we've got it right up there in the goal 1.
Can you read it? Or someone read it?
Me? Support provided for one board, so it's a single board, so you're only supporting one board.
So some central office, this from the central office perspective, is going to have one board to serve as opposed to 3, and that provides better equity.
Right. That was
Consistent, you can't treat the kids differently. That's
And one of the main one was that it might provide the possibility for part-time, say you had a part-time art teacher
Right.
in Wells,
Yeah.
and part-time in that way, that might become a full-time position, so that might be
Yeah, and
a positive.
that's that number 3 issue, the full-time equivalent staff. So we have some positions right now, I don't know about Wells, but we've struggled at Medowee with half-time positions. And what I've started to do over the years was to match them up with other half-time positions in our SU. Medowee shares an art teacher with Sunderland, and it shares a guidance counselor with Sunderland. Well, that's far away, So if there was potentially a way to share that between Wells, those types of positions, that becomes an attractive position for someone, just to bounce between Wells and Medowee, as opposed to Medowee and Sunderland. So that might, that FTE thing might be a real powerful place to live. Yep.
And the one right below that, connected to that, we thought if that happens, you might just get better candidates
Right.
for the position.
It's more sustainable staffing,
So you
more
might get-
attractive.
They might be more willing to stay,
Yeah.
and not just get their experience.
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen those partial positions, revolving door, over the years. Great. What else you got?
We also had choice, so that there could be school choice between the 2 schools, so parents
Yes.
could elect to send their children to either of the 2 schools.
Yeah, we've got that.
Yeah, and that works for, and I think both proposals kind of address it. It's not choice like we're talking about an enrollment option. The district is operating schools. But what it does do is say, under the law, there's some limitations when students can leave outside of the district, geographic exception to the statute. But within the district, all kinds of things are possible. And the law doesn't really speak to this idea of school choice among schools operated by a district, but it does give the school board the authority over that. So in both proposals, we sort of see like an intention statement, like we want to see this happen, and the new school board will, develop a policy, or we'll figure out a means by which parents can do that. So that's definitely something folks are identifying. It also gives the administration some advantages. I know, I won't say administratively, but when I've had kids who got in a tough spot, let's say from bullying issues, or just, couldn't fit in their school and, ruin the relationship there, it did leave us with a lot of options of where they could send them. To have another school as an option is really a nice thing to have in our toolbox, especially since they're so close together. Anything else in terms of equity?
We thought there could also be sharing of resources for field trips and sports.
Yeah.
And possibly offering foreign language.
Yeah, so I think the call them ensembles, so the ability to bring the bands together. The arts, anything in the arts can be done better in larger groups, generally speaking, or at least have opportunity then for more breakout groups and smaller groups. Sports to offer better quality competition for the kids and possibly save some money on transportation if you're going, if you're going on an away game. Instead of both going in opposite directions, you might be able to pull that together. Advanced programs. So if you had 2 kids at Meadowee who wanted advanced math, you had 2 kids at Wells, suddenly you got 4 kids. Could you do something to offer accelerated programs? Preschool, after school, you can certainly house one program probably and serve the region. I mean, the region, meaning among these 2 schools, you could run after-school care more effectively, provide more opportunity for kids, especially kids in poverty. Possibly more remediation opportunities. Foreign language is one that comes up sometimes, so if you don't, neither school offers foreign language right now, so to be able to maybe figure out additions to your curriculum. So one of the things I mentioned in this group, you might want at some point, Lisa's here, you might want to, this goes to the category of raising questions the committee might have. We might want to have the principals come, or have the staff come and talk to the committee. If you charge the principals to say, can you give us brainstorm a little bit amongst yourselves and tell us some ideas that we merge these districts, what things could you do that we can't do now? And have them come back to this committee with some ideas on what they could do. Okay, how about, we talked a little bit about it. Do you think it will have an impact on students achieving at higher levels? Goal number 2. Will it lead students to achieve or exceed the quality standards?
Potentially, if we offer foreign language, more enrichment.
More remediation, after-school care. Yep, so you can talk about those issues. There's some stuff there. Number 3, operational efficiencies. This one's a little tough. Where are the efficiencies going to come from financially, this Mark? Any ideas on that?
Well, high school level, I think transportation is one better coordinated.
So there's possibility to coordinate transportation routes that aren't currently coordinated. So under the law, Rutland Southwest, you guys centralize? What does Wells
Yes.
do? Yeah, Wells centralizes. We have one contract that was part of in this northern part of the DRC, but we never consider what our duplication routes are. So there might be an opportunity to do some work there to save a few bucks, particularly high school level. Any other efficiencies? We're not going to close the central office.
Custodial or maintenance efficiencies where there may not be enough work for 2 people at one school, but they only have half at another.
Do you guys have, how many custodians at Wells?
One part-time.
Okay, so we have 2 at Meadowee. How about, do you have, do you guys have a facilities person above and beyond that, or is it the school
The
board?
person who used to be at Meadowee is at Hoadley, but we use him at Wells to assist. We pay him a fee if he charges us, but he's a resident of the community, rarely charges us.
So we don't have a facilities person, basically a custodian does that. But maybe that's more of an SU issue. Because we don't have, DRC doesn't have a centralized facilities person. So maybe not, it's hard to say. So there would be you don't have a payroll office inside this building, do you?
No,
Okay. So
no,
it's not
everything's centralized.
financial.
So much is centralized already that it seems like these savings may be minimal.
Yeah, how about a nurse? Do you have a nurse?
Part-time.
Part-time. How do we
I believe we have one. References check.
That counts. Meadowee has a full-time, so that's an enhancement to the program, is to have nurses in the geographic area together. So if there was an emergency, they can call upon each other really and move back and forth between the 2 buildings. It would be one school district, so that's an enhancement. especially with the complexity of some of the kids we have today in schools. Efficiencies. Maybe combined purchasing, you might be able to do something there. Probably not a lot of money. Photocopiers, that kind of stuff.
We do photocopiers already.
Yeah, but not with Natalie. Yeah, you already centralized it?
Yes.
Yeah, we did too, so it's probably, it's nothing, I can't think of any major, yeah, there's not,
It would just make.
You might get efficiencies, so I'm thinking professional development.
yeah,
Like so often we hire somebody who
Yeah.
could have capacity up to 50 participants and we only have 25.
and certainly the travel involved, I mean, Medowee folks are traveling to the BRSU. You know, you might have enough people up here to house it, staff it here.
I mean, I don't know what the people want in terms of wells. Because Paul, you already saw metal. It seems to me, objectively, if I was outside, it would make sense to find this school and metal. But I don't know if that's not particularly our purview. I mean, they're both relatively small. And looking toward the future, if, yeah, but that's only not, well, not, since we already have the Maui school.
Right.
And this one, I don't know how viable
Right.
they are, I don't know the relative sizes.
Yeah, so we'll get some analysis on square footage and enrollment, but I think your point is, I don't know if this committee, are you thinking about reconfiguring these two schools? I don't think that's on your table.
It hasn't come up yet, but we did put it on
Yeah.
our sheet that it could potentially be, there could be a K-2 and then a
Yeah.
3-6 school in the future.
I've seen mergers where they do that. I don't think that's the burning issue right here.
It's
because
not the
both-
burning
Both
issue.
schools are of capacity. I think it makes the political process of doing the merger much more complex. But what you are saying is down the road, you're going to have one district, and a new district's going to be able to evaluate that. So you're going to be looking at the regional need.
But that would be the voters.
That's right. Yeah, it's still the voters anyway, but you're now looking at one group of voters, which is Rupert to Wells. There's a 4-year moratorium anyway on closing any school. But down the road, after that 4 years is done, then there's a possibility to look at that.
It would certainly make it easier.
Yeah. And, you know, the other issue is Medowee, I don't know Wells capacity-wise, but Medowee's at capacity right now. So before Medowee embarks on construction, you know, that's where a new district would say, well, before we build anything, let's look at some analysis of our facilities and find a way to prevent us having to build something if we had to build something.
Maybe Wells can fit quite a few more students, right? That is
Or maybe
a lot.
Maybe
Yeah,
it's-
we're about 55% or 60% capacity.
A lot more.
Or the new district could say, you know, let's evaluate running our own middle school program. You know, maybe enrolling 12 minutes a year down to that place and like, you know, if we ran our own middle school program, it would save us somehow. You know, who knows? But all those are potential things that might be, you know, addressed better by having one board as opposed to multiple boards. Hard to say.
Now, those safeguards that we'll put in yours for timber, do they stay even after the board forms? Is there a way those things change
So there's
after
a,
that merger happens?
yeah, well, the 4-year moratorium is hard baked into the law.
Right.
Okay, so
Then
after that, what Titmuss did was put in the Articles of Agreement, a mechanism that board requires a unanimous vote of that board before the issue comes to the voters. So that's something that stays as articles of the district. It can't be modified by the board.
And the vote of the town.
Yeah, that's in the law anyway. But that unique feature of having a unanimous vote,
So that protection will stay.
yeah.
Well, we could make it stick.
You could
Well,
put
that's-
something similar to
Yeah,
yours.
that's what I'm saying, if we did something similar,
Right.
that would be something that would stay once it's in the.
Yes, it's part of the Articles of Agreement. It's within your purview or the voters' purview to establish that. Yeah. It's a fairly common one too, so you see different versions of it. How about transparency and accountability? This one's a hard one. Yeah. So I could, where this comes from under the law, you know, when Act 46 was being written, no offense, John, to the legislative process.
I wasn't there.
They tend to cobble a lot of things together, okay? So one of the issues in the last few years was this issue, you know, under Act 153, SUs were getting more centralized, like special ed. SU budgets were getting huge. You know, once you throw special ed at the SU level, the SU budget becomes large. And rightfully, voters were getting increasingly concerned that they didn't get a direct vote on SU budgets. SU budgets are voted on by the SU board, not the voters themselves. So you had all these costs being centralized in a budget that the voters didn't get to touch. So this idea of transparency and accountability in Act 46 really was focused on this idea of building a supervisory district, abolishing your SU, creating one budget, no SU budget, and therefore voters get a direct vote on all the costs. That's not your situation, okay? So this question is a little harder to answer for you. You might be able to, you know, to talk about it from a Rupert Pollitt perspective. Currently, Rupert Pollitt folks, because they're part of a union school district, their tax rates are a function of multiple school districts. So when a Rupert taxpayer wants to figure out what their tax rate is, they have to understand Meadowy's budget and Rupert Town School District budget. So you're eliminating that confusion with this merger. Okay? You're getting rid of 3 districts that have combined budgets down to one budget for everyone. So that's one element of, you know, transparency that's being dealt with. That's about it. You're not going to be able to talk about the SU issue because you're going to still have an SU. Is it more accountable? Maybe from a regional sense, you could say something like, well, you know, we're going to have one district in the region where before we had 4. But
I guess you can always argue if there's one entity, it's easier for ordinary citizens to understand than 2.
except you're still going to have the second one, you're going to have an SU.
Yeah, but if it had to be 3.
The intent of the law was to talk about transparency by getting rid of your SU. You're not going to have that situation. So. But you're at least consolidating around a union district that's this complex. That's probably the best you're going to do there. How about this idea of value and cost? Is it efficient? Will taxpayers find this effective? I guess that's something we're going to have to determine.
That's a big question.
Right? To be determined. And, you know, you've got a couple of key variables there. One's going to be designation or not, and what's the effect, you know, what is that when we get into the modeling, you know? Absent that, generally what's going to happen with this type of merger is your tax rate's going to approach the mean. So if we took an average of the district's tax rates, that's generally where the new tax rate's going to end up. Because we're not going to close districts down, we're not shutting down SUs. So the tax rate's going to gravitate towards that mean. And that's going to mean people who are north of that mean are going to like it because their tax rate's going to come down. Districts that are lower than the mean aren't going to like it because it's going to come up. But mathematically, I'll predict right now, it's generally what's going to happen. Does Wells get a small schools grant?
Yes.
Okay, so there's one positive aspect. Under the law, that program is probably going to go away unless you merge. So Wells, the money Wells gets currently from the small schools grant, none of the other 3 districts get that money. So that
85,000 a year.
85? Yeah, so that revenue stream would be preserved, but now it would be called the Education Merger Incentive Grant in the amount, same amount of the small schools grant, but now the 85 would come to the new school district. It wouldn't just come to Wells. It would be a revenue stream of the new district. So you would portray that as, well, at least you'll be able to keep the money, even though it's going to be shared, because otherwise it would go away altogether. That's good news. Have you been held harmless by the 3.5% rule?
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay, so the other districts don't have an issue either. So I'd say, you know, the answer to the number 5 is really to be determined. But we'll have to do the modeling to answer that question for you, whether it's a good idea or not. But there's no magic here financially in doing this district merge. There's no, you know, unless there's something you guys want to talk about, like closing a school. Yeah, right. So there's no savings here, really.
Not immediate.
Yeah, long-term.
10 years from
legally-
now, if the
Yeah.
demographics
Yeah.
change,
Yeah,
at least you have that house.
that's right.
Possibly.
Okay? So,
I have a question about negotiating power. I mean,
yeah,
Wells went through a difficult contract.
teacher, you're talking about teacher negotiations? Yeah.
Could you explain that one?
Yep, so under the law, negotiations happens at the SU level, through bargaining councils at the SU level. So, you know, how this new district would be part of an SU, and that SU would be in charge of collective bargaining for this district. This district would have representation for that. So you'd still be bargaining as an SU, it's a question of which SU you'd be part of.
So I can address how Timoth, it was handled in Timoth, because Timoth was with us and then moved to Rutland South before they merged. And what they did, we were in the process of bargaining when they left, and the board from Timoth bargained independently with Rutland South and came up with, they actually ended up, the teachers ended up doing better because Rutland South actually paid more than Rutland Southwest. And they came up with a middle ground for 1 or 2 years. So there was some steps taken to move Timoth to where the other teachers were, but they didn't do it in 1 year cycle. They did it in a 2 or 3 year cycle. I don't know the details. I wasn't involved, and I could look. It's on. I'm sure it's online, but.
Yeah, so you have to bargain together. It doesn't mean, you know, you have to create a.
Wouldn't change things that substantially.
No, I mean, it just means you have to bargain. And I've seen it both ways. We did when we merged 6 together, no one came up to anyone else. Everyone paid on their ability to pay. So core districts gave an increase that was something they could afford. Recently, we merged, the agreement that was 6 into 1 merged with Floodbrook, so two merging together. There was some coming up in one district to match the other one, but that's really up to the bargaining, I think. So this district, once again, would be part of the bargaining council as part of the supervisory. So how that would be configured.
The other thing about the tax rate, you said it tends to go towards the median.
Yeah, there's nothing else changing here. So if
But we
we
just have so many moving parts
Right.
with this merger.
Yeah.
First being choice versus designation,
Yeah.
which could, the mean is all over
it
the place.
fluctuates your cost.
The other thing is half the town of Wells goes to Pulte
Right.
High School, and that tuition seems like it's up in the air
Yeah.
with that with their own merger,
Right.
and that could affect. I mean, there's just so many things
Yeah.
right now. There's so many unknowns.
Yeah,
I guess.
absolutely. When you think about those issues are already represented in the Wells tax rate. You know, so the Wells tax rate is a function of paying Pulte money.
Well, their tuition now is a reflection, is a Wells tax rate. We
Right.
don't know what their tuition is.
Absolutely, right?
It might go up to the state
So
average.
what we can do is look at the current level of education spending among the district and the current number of equalized pupils. If we throw all that money into one pot, and if we don't close the school, if you don't get rid of an SU, if you don't do a major change in your cost structure, the major change we're contemplating is a designation issue. But I would still say that's not on an order of magnitude as closing a school or getting rid of an SU. So what happens when we're basically just throwing all the money together is the tax rate's going to move towards that mean. So you're not, you know, we're going to run into this issue of districts that, I can tell you Rupert right now, the town school district has a very low tax rate. It has the tax rate as low as it can be. They are going to lose in any merger scenario. You know, their tax rate's going to come up to the mean. They're not going to like it. But they're not, the bottom line for them is they're not going to be allowed to stay by themselves. So it's not a question of, yeah, why would we want a 30-cent tax increase? Well, you don't have a choice, you know? But you also, for them, they have to look at what Menabee's tax rate is. Is it really a 30-cent tax increase once we factor Menabee in? Because their real cost is part of Menabee. So, Sonia, were you able to get some notes on that?
Tried.
Okay, so Sonia's doing her best to kind of capture some of the sort of goal part of this. And next time, we'll probably have it in minutes anyway, so we can look at trying to fill out that worksheet a little bit. So all we're trying to do now is fill out that AOE worksheet with some bulleted items, okay? So we'll review those for next time. try to make some progress on filling out that worksheet. So that's something, in terms of our final topic for tonight, to talk about a communications plan. When the public's interested in what you're doing, they're going to be interested in your agenda packets, but they might be interested in that worksheet being filled out. You know, like a status update, maybe that's something Sue you can write, here's what we did, maybe it's in the minutes, but then, you know, here's where we are in the process. Any other ideas on a communication plan or website? I don't know what your community's
I
need.
like the one we looked at, had the local boards at their own local meetings, gave community the opportunity to speak.
Oh, yeah.
And we do that in our committee, we have an act, our agenda
On your
tonight, we
agendas?
had an Act 46 discussion, it was here, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
could have been a discussion where, like last meeting, I asked Courtney if we could come for our last
Yeah.
meeting, and we discussed other things. But to bring the local in on local board meetings
Yeah.
is.
So that should be a continuous agenda item
Continuous, yes.
throughout the whole process. Yeah, that's a good idea. Do your communities need a website for this stuff? Is that some place where people would find information?
I think we need to get the word out there that would be there.
Yeah,
But I
right.
think
Assuming if
that's-
we got
I
the
think
word
that-
out, would that work for you?
People don't know what happened.
Yeah.
They're just, they know something's going on.
I think we also need to address the community members that don't go on the website.
Right.
Yes, people that I feel are being missed right now because
Yeah.
there are a lot of community members for a variety of reasons that don't go to websites. Or they get in there and they get frustrated. So I know what they call a newsletter that goes out fairly frequently, but something like that. We need to have brainstorm maybe for next time a way to get information out to those people that don't go to websites. Because they're out
Yeah.
and they are affected.
Do you know what other committees have done to address that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they do have standalone websites, and I think it's a good idea when I say standalone, meaning it's not under an SU, because you're not really attached to either SU, you're kind of out here on your own,
Right.
you know. But it depends on the communities. You know, if communities don't use websites, then, you know, what's the point? But I think what I was just thinking about is sort of a newsletter update from the chair, probably. You know, here's where we are in the process. We've adopted a work plan for the summer. Here's what we're trying to do by the end of summer. Here's what we're going to try to do in terms of community engagement come fall. Here's what we're working on next time. You're welcome to come watch us. It's like watching paint dry. But you're welcome to come. You know, just like a newsletter. And that can be posted on the website too, but, you know, create a sort of a newsletter update.
And like that monies that we have to go for.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah, you
Which I think
You could do a mailing,
makes sense
Yeah.
if we did
Or just
that.
hard copies at the school.
or leave hard copies laying around, update from your merger study committee. But you can talk about doing a blog, where some of you were kind of fluent in web technology, right? I mean, if we did a blogger blog or something like that, feel comfortable. I think some things that are useful to have up there are the newsletters, your biographies, like who you are, who's on the committee, a little bit about your background, you serve on other boards, that kind of thing. How to get a hold of you as your public
I think what we're
officials.
saying is that people who can read the blogs and stuff, those people already have it.
They're all set.
They're all set.
Yeah.
It's the, how do we get the hard copies out to
Yeah.
those that,
Okay. So maybe we focus on the newsletter format first.
I think that's the best, where you use the post office or something, every box open
Yeah.
in town. That way they have it, because an awful lot of people, even if they haven't heard of it, don't
Okay.
know.
So why don't we take a whack at the newsletter?
Okay.
Little format. If we can create a standard format, it'll make it easy, you know, to do. And then we can send that out. I know there's a couple of other websites around we can distribute that. Do you guys use Front Porch Forum at all or something like that? So
We do. I usually write updates.
So we can, whatever the channels of distribution on your communities are going to be different. We can figure out hard copies and leave them around, that kind of thing. You've got a budget for that sort of thing. So why don't we try doing a newsletter first? Okay. Any other questions about process or work plan? Pretty exciting.
so it's like once a week, do the month of August.
Yeah, we have some dates, right? Was that on the agenda?
I don't know if it's
I just
And
saw
I
it come
have
out
your,
later.
I have.
Right when I come in the parking lot, there was
So
a.
the dates were, February, no, I'm sorry,
February.
July,
I apologize.
July 28th from 6:30 to 8:30.
Where is it, what page is it?
It's the last page.
It is.
If you printed it, it wasn't on page 77.
When you brought tonight, had it. Yeah.
Oh, I see, yep.
Yeah. So the 28th, we'll have to talk about the 8th. There won't be a public hearing on the 8th, but hopefully you're still available. We can put a regular session in, or the majority of you are available.
Yeah, I won't be available.
Okay. We maybe have to do a meeting wizard or just keep the dates if we can get a majority, but we won't have a hearing, we'll keep working. And then the hearing ID, they're sort of out there in the parking lot. We're not sure yet when we're going to do that. 22nd, an extended session. So we're going to try to make, on that 22nd session, I think, we're going to really delve into the financials quite a bit.
So would that be multiple work sessions, like a going back
Yeah,
to
we'll
page
combine work
7?
sessions into, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so
We'll feed you that night.
we'll bring some food, water,
No beer involved.
let you use the bathroom. But I think this will work. I mean, really, the issue of the designation and whether you do a hearing or not, we're going to be in September at that point, so you should be in a pretty good place to have the worksheet done.
Canadian has been here to September 1.
Yep. Okay, so schedule next date is the 28th. We'll pick up on looking at the results of tonight, and we'll talk a bit about the geographic isolation issue, because I think that's going to be a feature we're going to have to talk about, because it does, particularly that Middletown Springs has been excluded essentially from this merger, and they're in the area, so we're going to have to talk about how this fits together. Maybe we talk a little bit about the SU issue in there as well. And
One thing about me about the geographic isolation, we're not isolating. I mean,
no, but it just, you need to talk about the region a little bit. You're going to need some narrative in your plan.
And they have no partners. They have exhausted, they have reached out to.
You would just document that. We had conversations in the region, we pursued this conversation a certain way. And then after the next one, we'll probably jump into the financial stuff a bit. So it'll give you some time to prepare that for the central offices. Okay, that's it, I guess.
Okay, so we've done the proposed meeting schedule, monitor process and performance. We just wanted to touch base back on our code of conduct and how everyone feels we did with complying with that. Any thoughts? I would just say that I did hear a number of side conversations, and I would ask people to refrain from doing that so that you can hear what the person is saying who has the floor, and our meeting can run more efficiently. And also what you're saying as a side conversation, we might all want to hear that also. Anything else on monitoring process and performance? John?
I brought up about the 827, the statutes and I looked them up on the statutes online, and it's different than what's in our packet. What's in our packet or in our folder, is just the changes that Act 46 did to them. So in our packet, it says Title 16, Chapter 827, and then you see that on those pages. I don't remember what they were, but that only, so when it's crossed out, that means a change from previous law, and that when there's 3 asterisks, it means whatever's beyond that stays, it's not deleted. So at the moment, the special provision for Wells and the previous stuff is still in there, as long as there still is a Wells School District, a Pollock District, and a Rupert District. But there's a dichotomy there. I said, why is this different? And I did talk to Donna Russo-Savage this morning about this.
we just provided you a copy of Act 46, so Act
Right.
46 just has the amendments or whatever, but if you want complete copies of the statute, you can put them in there if you want. But that is an issue, you know, there's going to be perhaps some statutory modifications made if you want to pursue designation.
Sure. I just wanted people to know that's why the statutes are updated through 2015. They haven't done 2016, but Act 46 was all 2015.
Yeah.
So would you like, do you think it would be helpful for us to have?
I think it's such a big issue that to have it, you know, I almost made copies myself for people, but for the entire 827,
Sure.
since it will be.
Yeah, when you pull that group, there's a couple statutes in there that are kind of related. Yeah, sure.
But you could put, and then you could compare that with what's in your folder to see where the changes were.
Okay. At this point, I think we are ready to adjourn. If anyone would like to make that motion.
So moved.
Seconded by Enrico, moved by Bill Meyer. All in favor, please say aye.